Hello, my sewing friends. Here is my sew along for Simplicity 8640. I'm Jen, and this is not my sewing room, but we will get there in just a second. This is my sew along for Simplicity 8640. I love this dress. It's my favorite dress of all time. It might look like this. It might look like this. It just depends on which one you happen to grab. They are exactly the same thing. This is an Elaine Heigl design. It is a tunic and dress, and you can do it with short sleeves or not. You have lots of options with this dress, and I love that because, man, have I done it all manner of ways. I have color blocked it. I have done all kinds of pockets. I've played with stripes. I've played with the hemline. It's just a lot of fun to do, and it is such an easy dress to wear. It's very loose fitting, and yet it's got this waistline seam that comes down, and it's just so flattering. You can do this in all kinds of fabrics, and it does say that it's not suitable for stripes or plaids or one-way designs. Well, the one-way design I think you could probably do, and I have absolutely done stripes a couple of times. I loved playing with it, mainly because you've got the center front seam and you can really have some fun with that. It calls for 2 buttons, and those are purely decorative. They are for the pockets. I made view A. I lengthened mine to really almost a maxi. It's about ankle length. The tunic is really more of a dress. I would not call it a tunic. It's long enough that it's really a dress. So sizing, let's talk about that. This comes in a size 10 to a size 28. So that is a finished bust measurement of 37.5 to 55. I would suggest that you find your size using your high bust measurement. That's something Nancy Zeman, the sewing guru of all time, she advises that you do that, and that way you'll fit your shoulders, and then you can go from there and be able to make any adjustments that you need to the waistline, to the bust line. Really, this is a very loose fitting dress, so probably won't have any trouble. I did bring mine in at the waistline in the back just to give it a little closer fit, but like I say, it's a very loose fit. Gives you a shape because of the way that the waistline is cut, but it's still really loose fitting and so comfortable, so keep that in mind. This fabric is a poly cotton from Hawaii Fabric Mart. Okay, let's get into the sew along. Here are the pieces we need for Simplicity 8640. The bodice front is piece 1. Piece 2 is the front skirt. If you are making the shorter one, here is your cutting line. The longer one, here is your cutting line. If you need to lengthen this, you can do it either here at the hemline, here, or you can draw some lines that are perpendicular to your grain line, like right here, and then lengthen or shorten as you need it. Piece 3 is the pocket, and piece 4 is the pocket lining. This pocket is gathered at the bottom, and it kind of goes like that. And I don't like this pocket, so I'm not going to use it, and you don't have to either. You can use any pocket you like. In fact, you don't even have to put pockets on this dress. That's the pocket that I'm going to use. So whatever you decide in terms of pockets or not, that's your pocket piece. Piece 5 is the back bodice and skirt, or just the back. Once again, if you're going to lengthen the skirt, then you're going to need to mark it on your skirt, and be sure and you mark it on the back as well, so that the front and the back are the same length. Piece 6 is the front facing. Piece 7 is the back facing, and these are for the neckline. Piece 8 and 9 are the armhole facings. You have a front armhole facing and a back armhole facing. And then piece 10 is the sleeve. I'm making the sleeveless version, so I won't need this pattern piece either. Okay, the first thing that our instructions call for is to make the pockets. I'm not going to make this pocket, but I'm going to show you how the pattern tells you to make the pockets that go with the pattern. So first thing we're going to do is gather the pocket between these 2 notches. Use whatever gathering method you like. I just like to you do 3 rows of stitching. Not everybody likes that, but that's how I do it. First of all, I'm gonna pin it to the pocket lining, matching up the notches like this. Actually, let's do it from this side. I like to do 3 rows of gathering because I think you get a more even gather, but you can do this with elastic, you can do it with 2 rows of stitching, you can do whatever you want. That's just the way I do it. Okay. And then what we're going to do is go to the sewing machine, and we're just going to start at, well, we're going to match this notch and these 2 dots. So we're going to do that. Then we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and we're going to start here and stitch around and then leave an opening so that we can turn these. If you want, you can mark this where you want to stop and start, but I just eyeball it. Okay, our pocket's all stitched. I left an opening, and you know what? I just stitch right over top of my gathering stitches, and then I just pull them out. Yeah, so now I'm going to clip my corners, and then I'm going to trim my seam. Now the thing about this is, once you turn this, they want you to slip stitch this opening closed after you press it. And I just think that's pointless because you're going to stitch this to the front of the dress. You're going to top stitch it down, and I just don't think it's that you need to go to the trouble to slip stitch the opening closed, because you're going to stitch right over top of it when you top stitch the pocket down. So here's your pocket, and that's really all there is to it. I'm not going to do that pocket. I'm going to do this pocket. I just made myself a template, and I went ahead and cut that. Now when I do my pockets, I always cut 2, and I use one as the outside pocket and then one as the pocket lining. So what you want to do is take your pocket piece over and stitch just the top edge to the lining piece. And that's what I've done here. I have my pocket, and then I've got my pocket lining. And all I've done was put them right sides together, and I've stitched them. But then when I went over to the ironing board, I pressed this seam open, and then I pressed this in a way that probably doesn't make any sense, but it makes sense to me. On this side, I have a border of about 1/2 inch. And I want a little bit of room here from at the top of the pocket between it and the lining, just so that the lining never shows. I think it gives you a cleaner finish. So because I did that, now I need to even this up. And all I'm gonna do is trim this off. You can see that this is about 1 inch. That's because I have a 1/2 inch seam here. That's why this is only a 1/2 inch, and yet this is 1 inch. So all I'm gonna do is trim this off. And now what I'm going to do is turn this inside out and match up my edges. And then I'm going to stitch this, and I'm going to leave an opening somewhere so that I can turn it in. So my pockets are pretty much done. I wanted to show you, I went ahead and stitched all the way around. I left my openings on the side. What I did was I just went over to the iron. I slid the tip of my iron in between these 2 seams after I had trimmed them. You can do it before you trim them, after, but you just slide your iron in here and then just press that flat. And that way when you turn it inside out, you get a really nice turned edge. Also at the bottom tip here, and you can do this with all corners. I learned this years ago from Nancy Zeman. What I do is stitch down to the point where I'm going to pivot, and I don't pivot all the way. I pivot part way, and then I take 1 stitch across where the point is, and then I pivot again and I go back up. And you can see on this one where I've pressed it, it's just a really crisp point. You can see I've got a really nice little facing there on top of my pocket. I like that so much because it doesn't show. I don't know, it's just a cleaner finish. So when I top stitch this onto the dress, I am going to sew right here over top of that opening, and I'm gonna sew it closed. So next order of business is to put your pocket on. If you've marked this on your skirt, then here's what I would advise you to do, because these pockets are marked really, really low. So here's what I think you should do. I think you should pin your pocket piece to your skirt piece, and then pin your bodice piece to your skirt piece. Take it over to a mirror or somewhere and hold it up to your shoulder, and then see if this is gonna be at the right spot for you. It wasn't at the right spot for me, it was way too low, so I ended up marking my pocket in a new place. But when you do this and you go to put your hand in your pocket, just see where your hand naturally falls and mark that, and then you'll be able to adjust where the pocket is on the skirt to suit you. Pockets are on. I just went ahead and top stitched those down. I used about 1/8 of an inch edge stitch. I don't always like the look of 1/4 of an inch away, but in this case, I went ahead and just did about 1/8 of an inch away. Okay, next step is to attach the bodice to the skirt section. The instructions tell you you need to stay stitch this top edge. Now I'm gonna put piping in the seam. So go ahead and do your stay stitching here, and then we're going to attach this to the skirt section. Okay, I've got one side of my bodice and skirt section all stitched together. I added the piping, and my other side, I just wanted to show you how I did this piping. I stitched with my zipper foot as close into the edge as I could, and then when I stitched this, I went just a little bit beyond where I basically my basting stitches. I'm going to go back in and overlock the seam, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like. So got that one done, and if you're not doing piping, which you're probably not, you attach it, matching up the notches. Now that I've got everything stitched down, I went ahead and overlocked my seam here, pressed it up towards the bodice, and now we need to do our center front seam. And you can do this a couple of ways. What the pattern tells you is that you need to sew the seam and then finish your seam, overlock your edge, and then press it towards the right side, and then top stitch down on the outside, on the right side, at 1/4 of an inch. So I haven't always done it that way, and you don't have to do that. What you can do is stitch the seam and then open the seam out and stitch down either side, which I feel like is more symmetrical. So if you're gonna do the seam where you open it up, then you'll probably wanna go ahead and overlock the edge of each of these pieces, this long edge. And then you'll also want to do the same thing on your back piece, because the same thing's going to happen. You're going to have a center seam. This is center front, and with the back pieces, you'll have a center back seam. So however you want to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and sew this center front seam. You do want this to come to a point. You want to make sure that you match up your seams here. One thing you can do is take a pin and go right through your seam. There we go. You do have notches here in the skirt section that you can match together. So you're just gonna pin this seam together and then sew it. Okay, so the center front seam is done, waistline seam is done, pockets are on. I went back in and redid the pockets because I wanted to have the piping go around. And I wanted to show you how I did this inside. The pattern calls for you to finish the seam, press it to one side, and then top stitch on the other side. And I don't want to do any top stitching on mine. That's the beauty of this pattern. You don't have to do any top stitching if you don't want to. So because I matched up the pattern on this, I don't want to turn it to one side and top stitch down. Also because I have this bulky piping in here. So what I did was press the seam open above the waistline on the bodice, and then I clipped it here at the piping line where it meets, and then I just turned it to one side and finished the seam on down in the center front. So if you are following the pattern, you will want to press all of this, the whole seam, to one side, and then you'll want to top stitch down. Or if you want, you can open the seam out like I have here and then top stitch down each side. Or you don't have to top stitch at all. It's just up to you, however you want to do it. But my front section is done. Let's move on to the back section. Okay, for the center back, we're just going to stitch this center back seam, and same as the front, if you want to finish the seam, turn it to one side and top stitch it, you can do that. If you want to press the seam open and top stitch, you can do that, or you don't have to top stitch at all, whatever you want to do. So your choice. That's the beauty of sewing, is that you can do it any way you like. Okay, I've gone ahead and stitched my center back seam. Next step is to join the front and the back at the shoulder seams. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I am also going to join my front and back facings, which have been interfaced, at the shoulder seams. And then I'm going to finish this raw edge along my facing. Shoulder seams are done, and I've gone ahead and serged those and pressed them towards the back. I've also done the same thing with the facing. I always press my seams open with a facing like that. It just creates less bulk. And then I've gone ahead and finished the edge of my facing. I just serged it. Now I'm just going to attach it to the neckline, matching the notches and the shoulder seams. Really, those are the only two major markers that you need to match up. Pretty much everything else will line up pretty well. If you want to find the center front of your facing and line that up with your center front seam, you can do that. I'm just going to eyeball it. Okay, I'm just going to go take this over and sew this seam. I got the facing attached, and now I'm just going to use my pinking shears, which I have gotten used to doing, to trim this seam. And one of the things I like about pinking shears is that that zigzag gives you an automatic ease that's built in that you might otherwise get with clipping the curves. I think you still might need to clip the curves, but I just like using pinking shears. I think it's especially if you're trimming really close to the seam, and I'm not. I'm getting, I don't know, probably about 1/4 of an inch away, which works for me. Okay, so there's our trimmed seam. I'm going to clip these curves just to make sure that it's going to turn the way I want. And then I'm going to take it over and understitch. Okay. I'm going to go over and press this so that I'm pressing the seam towards the facing, and then I'm going to understitch really close to the seam all the way around. Neckline facings all finished, and I'm going to wait to do the top stitching until I do the armhole facings. But before I do that, I need to do my side seams. My side seams don't line up exactly, probably because in doing this piping it pulled them out of shape. But you know what? I've got this extra right here. You can see it. On this side, I went ahead and trimmed it off, kind of. But I know that I'm going to overlock these edges. So I'm just going to leave this one like it is, and then that'll get chopped off when I go in to finish the seam. So I'm going to go ahead and do my side seams and finish those, and then I'll come back and we'll do the armhole facings. I have 2 front armhole pieces because I have a pointy notch, and then I have 2 back armhole pieces with a flat notch. And so I just need to join these together at the shoulder seam and then again at the side seam. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go ahead and stitch these at both ends, and then I'm going to finish this raw edge just like I did the neckline facing. My side seams are done, everything's all evened up, and it's looking good. Now we're going to attach the armhole facings, and all I'm going to do is match up the pointy notch with the front and the squared off notch with the back. So right sides together, I'm just going to go ahead and attach those and then treat that the same way I treated the neckline. Trim the seam and then understitch and press it to the inside. Same thing. My neck facing is done. My armhole facings have been understitched and pressed, and now I'm ready to do my top stitching. And I'm going to top stitch 1 inch away from the finished edges. And if you like, you can also top stitch like 1/4 of an inch away from this finished edge. It's up to you. Or don't top stitch at all. That's totally fine too. You do you. I am going to go ahead and just only do the 1 inch away top stitching, and that's going to be decorative, and it's also going to hold the facings down, which is the only way I like facings. I've gone ahead and pinned this one, but I haven't pinned this one because I wanted to tell you that what I like to do is tuck this armhole facing in underneath the neck facing. When you do the stitching, your stitching lines may meet or they may overlap a little bit, which is totally fine. And I don't like to pin all along these edges or here, because I find that I've got to work with the fabric as I go around the curve. And I think the key here is to really just go slowly. And especially when you're coming around this edge, this shoulder seam edge. So just slow way down and take it really easy. You may want to lengthen your stitch. Mine is always set at 2.5 millimeters, and I increase it to 3 or 3.5 millimeters when I do top stitching. So I have pinned this at the shoulder seams and at the side seams. Well, I thought I had. And I'm pinning it on the outside. I'm trying to match up these seams the best I can, but be aware that if these are off by 1/8 of an inch or even as much as 1/4 of an inch, you'll be fine. The important thing is to get this nice and flat so that you don't have any puckers. And I sew this from the right side. I always like to sew on the inside of a circle so that I'm doing this, you know, I'm going like this way rather than trying to go against the curve. So I'm going to go ahead and top stitch my armholes and my neck facings, and then we'll be ready to move on to the hem. Got my top stitching done, and I don't know why I was thinking that these would overlap, but they didn't at all. I did these first because I knew I wanted to tuck them underneath of my stitching here along my neckline. And I did that. I went ahead and did that. And then I added my tag. Okay, this is ready for a hem. And you can see I've gone ahead and hemmed mine. What I've done is use single fold bias tape just to create a bound hem. I did this to echo this piping here on the pockets and then here at the waistline. But if you want to do it like the pattern tells you how to do it, let me explain that. First of all, you need to go along the hemline and stitch 5/8 of an inch away. This is a longer stitch that I've used because if you want to pull it out later, it'll pull out really easily. It's a basting stitch. So stitch all along your edges. I just kept stitching. You know, I came to the corner and then I pivoted. And then I went over to my ironing board and I pressed this up along the stitching line at 5/8 of an inch. So I just pressed the whole thing up. And then what I did was I came back in and I've got this little box here from the pressing, and I turned this right sides together, matching up this edge with this edge so that you form a triangle like that. And you see where, let's see, you're matching both these edges. So stay stitching on top of stay stitching. And you can see where you've got this little folded line here. You're just going to stitch across there, right across here. And what you're going to end up with is basically this. Now this I've gone ahead and pressed again because basically when you fold this in on the 5/8 of an inch seam line, then you fold it down again to get that narrow hem. And it's about 1/4 of an inch. But what you end up with when you stitch that corner is this. And then you just want to clip the corner off like that, and then turn it to the outside so that you have a mitered corner. And then you it's kind of fiddly, but it does give a nice finish. But I just pulled mine out, pulled those stitches out until I could fold it under that extra 1/4 of an inch so that I got a really nice mitered corner like that. And then you're just going to go in and stitch this narrow hem down. So that's how you do it if you're going to do it like the pattern says. This is, like I say, very fiddly, and there have been a lot of times in my life, in fact, most of the time, when I will just do this all the way to the edge, and then I will turn and then fold this under and then just square it off like that. But I will say this, that creates a lot of bulk right here, and it tends to want to twist out of shape. And so it's just not as clean a finish as this is. And the pattern will tell you to do it this way. So, you know, whatever you like, you can do it with bias binding, you can do a hem facing, you can do all kinds of things, but that's how the pattern is going to tell you how to do it. And this is what I did. So that is the dress. We're all done. So that is the dress. Easy peasy. I mean, really, you could do this thing in probably a day, maybe a couple of days if you took your time and did some fun options. Like I say, you can use stripes. I have done it with stripes. If you're going to open your seams and press them flat and then top stitch from there, you will probably want to overlock your edges before you sew that seam, just so you're not having to do it after you sew the seam and, you know, wangle around, and I don't know, it's just easier if you go ahead and overlock your edges first. With this particular dress, I ended up putting the bodice and the skirt sections together, sewing it together, and then I looked at it and I did not like the way this pattern was falling on the front bodice. So I went back in and recut the bodice and I matched the pattern. I went to a lot of trouble to do that, and here's the thing, I probably could have eliminated a lot of the trouble of pattern matching. I stuck with that for two reasons. First of all, I wanted to get the experience of pattern matching. I just think it's good practice, you know, and I like that center front seam. The other thing is I could have cut it all in one piece. I couldn't cut it on the fold because this bodice is cut on the bias, which means that this waistline seam is cut on the straight of grain, and I didn't want to mess with that. So what I could have done was just traced off the bodice as one entire piece and cut it that way on the bias. That would have been fine. But one of the great things about this dress is that you put the bodice with the skirt and the bodice with the skirt, and then you do this center front seam. And I love that because the way that the waistline seam comes down, it's easy to match. And I knew that since I put piping on this one, it was going to be a real pain in the neck if I was going to cut this in one piece and then have to match up those skirt sections, you know, and sew it the way I was going to have to sew it. I would have had to stitch that center front skirt seam and then put them together. And I just didn't want to do that. So that was why I did that. I did top stitch the facings at 1 inch away, which is what the pattern calls for. But you know, you could easily stitch your facings down at the seam lines, the side seam and the shoulder seams on the inside. You could stitch in the ditch. You could do that if you didn't want to do the top stitching. You could top stitch just 1/4 inch away on the neckline or the armholes. Whatever you want to do, you do you. That's the beauty of this dress. The hemline I did a little bit different. This calls for a narrow hem. I didn't do that with this one. I used a bias binding and I just basically bound the hems. I wanted to play around with the idea of the piping in the waistline and the piping around the pockets. So I just echoed that in the hemline. Pockets. Let me get to that. I hate the pockets on this dress that come with the pattern. I just don't like them at all. I made them the first time that I made the dress, and I didn't like, number one, how low they are marked on the skirt, and number two, I just didn't like the look of the pocket. So I have done all manner of pockets. I've done side seam pockets. I've done patch pockets in all kinds of shapes. I've done patch pockets that tie at the top. I've borrowed pockets from all manner of other dresses or tops and just come in and done those. So, you know what? You can play with this however you like. You know, I cut this one almost ankle length because I've cut it short before too, and I just wanted to play around with that. And again, that's the beauty of this dress. You can do all manner of things, and it's not hard. It goes together in about a day, maybe 2 days tops, depending on how complicated you want to get with it, with top stitching and embellishments and pockets, that sort of thing. But I love this dress. And of course, you know, I'll probably make it again. I think I have 4 or 5 in my closet right now, and it is my go-to dress. When I get up in the morning, I put on one of the ones that I made in rayon because it's soft, it's comfortable, and it's perfect. So I hope that you'll give this dress a try. Let me know if you do. Let me know how you get along. Let me know about any changes that you make. Let's talk about all that in comments. And if you'd like to see some other versions of this dress that I've made, here's a playlist where I talk about all of them. That's it for now from me, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.